She lived for years ignored on the streets. He had everything except peace. When the two appeared together in first class, what happened next left even the wealthiest in absolute silence. The air conditioning in Washington, D.C. International Airport hummed with its usual mechanical coldness, creating an artificial atmosphere that contrasted dramatically with the humid September afternoon heat stretching beyond the panoramic windows. Richard Carter discreetly adjusted the cuff of his beige linen shirt, an automatic gesture that revealed just a trace of nervousness in an otherwise imperturbable man. At 42, he had developed a presence that commanded respect without demanding attention, a rare quality in the American corporate world, where ostentation often masked insecurity. Beside him, Emily Thompson watched, fascinated, as the constant choreographed movement of hurried executives, their rolling suitcases rhythmically clinking against the polished marble floor like an urban symphony of ambition and urgency. Her brown eyes shone with genuine childlike curiosity that deeply contrasted with the forced maturity that the unforgiving streets of New Orleans had imposed on her 22 years of life. Every detail of the airport, from the illuminated, duty-free shop windows to the efficient movement of the cleaning staff, seemed to fascinate her as if it were the first time she had witnessed such a level of organization and prosperity. "First time in first class?" Richard asked, his voice maintaining the gentle, low tone that she had learned to recognize as an expression of genuine paternal affection, without condescension or pity. Emily nodded, trying to contain the smile that threatened to escape and reveal her excitement. "First time in any class of airplane," she admitted, nervously playing with the strap of the simple synthetic leather purse he had insisted she buy for the trip. "I still can't completely believe this is real. That I'm here, that you're here, that all this is happening." Richard observed her for a prolonged moment, his mind inevitably returning to the first time he had seen her at the St. Clair Center in New Orleans 3 months ago. She had been coordinating the organization of clothing donations with a natural efficiency that had immediately caught his attention. Her movements were careful and deliberate, revealing a premature responsibility that touched something deep in his heart. There was something in her eyes, not just the obvious pain of someone who had lost much early in life, but a silent strength and an unwavering determination that deeply impressed him. 3 months later, when the adoption papers were finally finalized, after a complex and emotionally exhausting legal process, Emily had cried for a full hour, repeating between sobs that she didn't deserve such luck in life. It was at that moment that Richard fully understood the responsibility he had assumed, not just financial or legal, but emotional and moral. "You deserve this and much more," he said now, placing his hand gently on her shoulder in a protective manner. "We're family now, remember, and family means you no longer need to question whether you deserve love, care, and opportunities." The boarding announcement for the Air USA flight to New York echoed through the terminal with the usual corporate pomp. Bilingual announcements executed with precision, preferential queue organized with military efficiency, and even a discreet red carpet leading first-class passengers from the VIP lounge to the aircraft. Richard and Emily were the first to have their tickets scanned, unhurried and without unnecessary ostentation, but with the naturalness of those who legitimately have the right to be there. As they walked calmly toward the boarding gate, Emily began to notice the looks. Initially, they weren't necessarily malicious or hostile, just curious, carrying that kind of social perplexity that arises when people observe something that doesn't perfectly fit into their pre-established mental categories. A complex mixture of belated recognition. Some passengers clearly knew Richard from specialized business magazines or corporate events, and growing estrangement. Emily simply didn't match the expected pattern for accompanying a man of Richard Carter's position and wealth. She didn't wear recognizable brand-name clothes, didn't carry designer bags, didn't have the natural aristocratic bearing of socialites who frequented exclusive business events, and definitely didn't possess that developed social confidence that old money typically provided to families of the American elite. "Dad," she whispered, using a word that still sounded strange and new in her mouth, but carried increasingly more emotional significance. "People are looking at us strangely." "Let them look," Richard responded serenely, his voice carrying a quiet authority that she was learning to admire. "You have every right to be here. just as much as any of these people, and probably more right than many of them. The first-class door opened like an elegant portal to another social universe. The interior of the cabin was a meticulous study in beige and gold tones, with genuine leather seats that looked like individual thrones, small polished tables that perfectly reflected the directional LED lights, and a level of service that transformed the act of traveling into an experience of refined hospitality. Emily swallowed hard, allowing herself to briefly remember the overcrowded and frequently broken buses she used to take in New Orleans, where she sometimes traveled standing for hours in conditions that tested the limits of human dignity. Richard found his usual seat, 1A, with the automatic naturalness of someone who had made that journey hundreds of times over 2 decades of business travel. Emily carefully settled in beside him, trying to imitate his relaxed and confident posture, but her fingers betrayed her growing nervousness, drumming involuntarily against the soft leather of the armchair. A young flight attendant, in an impeccable uniform and perfectly trained professional smile, approached efficiently to check their tickets. His eyes quickly passed over Richard. Immediate recognition, automatic reverence developed through years of serving important passengers, before landing on Emily with an expression that subtly changed. The professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible to most observers, but Emily had developed a keen sensitivity to detect these micro-expressions of judgment and rejection. "Tickets, please," he said, extending his hand with a politeness that was no longer completely natural. Richard handed over both documents without any rush or anxiety, his body language radiating the quiet confidence of someone whose presence had never been questioned in any environment. The attendant examined the tickets with excessive and unnecessary attention, as if expecting to discover some administrative error, some technical justification for the social awkwardness he felt but could not openly express. Emily carefully observed the young man's expression, change almost imperceptibly when he confirmed that both tickets were completely legitimate, first class, seats side by side, no irregularity of any kind. It was evident that he had expected to find some discrepancy that would explain Emily's apparently incongruous presence in that social space. "Thank you," muttered the attendant, returning the papers with a courtesy that now sounded slightly forced and artificial. "Have an excellent flight." But he didn't immediately move away as would be protocol. He remained there for a few additional seconds, clearly uncomfortable and visibly uncertain about how to proceed, before addressing other passengers with an urgency he hadn't previously demonstrated. Emily felt that familiar painful tightening in her stomach, that devastating sensation of not belonging that had accompanied her since childhood, and that she had hoped to leave behind upon becoming part of Richard's family. On the streets of New Orleans, she had patiently learned to become practically invisible to survive, developing the ability to go unnoticed as a protection mechanism. Now in a first-class airplane cabin, she discovered that being seen and judged could be equally uncomfortable, just in a different and psychologically more complex way. "It's okay," Richard said softly, noticing the growing tension in her posture and facial expression. He opened his Italian leather bag and took out a thick book, Complex Systems Analysis and Strategic Management, as if this were just another absolutely routine business flight. "Take a deep breath and remember, you belong in this space just as much as anyone here." But the social climate in the cabin was gradually changing, like a storm forming on the horizon. A discreet but growing murmur had begun a few rows behind them. An elegant lady with meticulously arranged platinum hair and an obviously expensive pearl necklace whispered something urgent to her husband, a corpulent man who repeatedly looked in the direction of Emily and Richard with a poorly disguised expression of disapproval. A younger executive, wearing an obviously expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase, insistently checked his cell phone, as if expecting external confirmation that there was some fundamental error in the boarding system. Emily desperately tried to concentrate on the in-flight magazine, flipping through pages about exotic destinations and luxury products, but the words danced blurred before her eyes. She intimately knew those looks, those whispers laden with implicit judgment. She had grown up being constantly evaluated and considered inadequate because of her appearance, her social origin, her obvious lack of financial resources. She had naively thought that, By officially becoming Richard Carter's daughter, she would automatically be protected from this type of social humiliation. But she now discovered with painful clarity that prejudice could easily cross any economic barrier, even the first class of an airplane. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later, this time accompanied by a more senior colleague, a woman with severe features and militarily rigid posture, who clearly occupied a position of authority in the crew hierarchy. They approached seat 1A again, walking with the hesitant determination of people who had received an unpleasant mission but felt obligated to execute it. "Mr. Carter," began the senior flight attendant, her voice maintaining a superficially professional tone but laden with poorly disguised tension. "There has been a small technical confusion with our reservation system. Would it be possible to speak with you privately for a few minutes?" Richard slowly looked up from his book, his expression remaining completely neutral and controlled. "I don't see what confusion there could be," he said with a calmness that dramatically contrasted with the obvious nervousness of the crew. "Our tickets are in perfect order, were purchased through official channels, and there is absolutely no irregularity." "Yes, sir, we understand that perfectly, but some passengers have expressed specific concerns." "What exact type of concerns?" Richard's question was made in a low tone, but loaded with an authority that made the flight attendant involuntarily step back. The woman visibly hesitated, clearly searching for words that could express the discriminatory nature of the complaints, without sounding explicitly prejudiced or legally problematic. "Issues related to operational comfort," she finally said, a vague and transparent excuse that fooled absolutely no one present. Emily felt her face heat up with an explosive mixture of shame and indignation. That carefully chosen word, concerns, echoed in her mind like a painful echo of all the countless times she had been rejected, questioned, considered inadequate for spaces that others naturally occupied. She instinctively began to rise, preparing to accept any reallocation that could immediately end that devastating public embarrassment. But Richard's firm, warm hand gently touched her arm. "Sit down," he said softly, but with a firmness that admitted no discussion. Then he turned to the flight attendant with a controlled intensity that made the entire environment seem electrically charged. "My daughter and I will remain exactly in our designated seats. If there is any genuine operational problem, I am absolutely certain that the professional crew of this company will know how to resolve it appropriately." The word "daughter" fell over the first-class cabin like an unexpected revelation that instantly changed the social dynamics of the situation. Emily saw some passengers exchange looks of genuine surprise, the information circulating in discreet whispers that slightly altered the tone of the ambient conversation. The revelation of the relationship did not eliminate the underlying discomfort, but it introduced a new complex variable into the delicate social equation that was unfolding before everyone. The flight attendant visibly retreated, her professional authority clearly shaken by Richard's unwavering firmness and the potentially explosive nature of the situation that was developing. She quickly headed to the front of the cabin, where she had a whispered and apparently intense conversation with other senior members of the crew, discreetly gesturing in the direction of seats 1A and 1B. Emily could physically feel the weight of curious glances upon her, but now she also perceived something subtly different in the atmosphere. A younger passenger, wearing modern glasses and with an intelligent and attentive expression, observed her with what seemed to be genuine curiosity and sympathy, not hostile judgment. A middle-aged man who had initially demonstrated visible discomfort now seemed to be actively reconsidering his position, his facial expression evolving from disapproval to something closer to embarrassed reflection. "Why are they doing this to us?" Emily asked in a low voice, her voice inevitably laden with an old and deep sadness that Richard immediately recognized as an echo of decades of rejection and social humiliation. "Because some people confuse social privilege with the natural right to exclude other human beings," he answered, completely closing the book and dedicating all his emotional attention to her. "They erroneously believe that belonging to certain spaces is a zero-sum game, that allowing you to be here somehow diminishes their right to be here too. But we won't allow this limited mentality to define who we are, nor how we relate, nor the value of the family we've consciously built." At that tense moment, A firm and clear voice cut through the charged atmosphere of the cabin like a sharp blade. It was an elegant lady with perfectly arranged white hair and penetrating blue eyes that shone with sharp intelligence and an unwavering dignity. Mrs. Cecilia White, widow of a respected diplomat and retired university professor, had observed the entire uncomfortable situation in growing silence, but finally decided that she had witnessed enough injustice. "Excuse me," she said, rising with the natural dignity of someone who had witnessed many forms of discrimination throughout 8 decades of life and had firmly decided not to tolerate another one. "I would like to understand exactly what kind of operational problem justifies this embarrassing and potentially humiliating charade." The silence that followed was dense and heavy like morning fog. All eyes in first class simultaneously turned to the crew, who now found themselves in an even more delicate and potentially explosive position. Mrs. Cecilia had been a sociology professor for 4 decades before marrying the diplomat, and her legendary ability to expose social hypocrisy with surgical verbal elegance was known in certain intellectual circles of the capital. "Ma'am," tried to explain the senior flight attendant, her voice now visibly less confident, "we are only following standard company protocols to ensure the comfort of all passengers. Protocols that involve systematically questioning passengers whose tickets are in perfect legal order." Mrs. Cecilia arched an eyebrow with surgical precision. "Protocols that suggest reallocation, based exclusively on the subjective discomfort of other passengers, with someone's physical appearance or perceived social origin. Pardon me, but I don't recognize this protocol in any respectable airline operating in American territory." Emily felt a powerful wave of gratitude for the courageous intervention of this stranger, who had chosen to publicly position herself on the side of justice. Simultaneously, a significant part of her still desperately wished that this entire embarrassing situation would simply disappear, or that the floor would open and swallow her away from all those curious and judgmental gazes. Richard remained externally motionless, but she could subtly perceive the controlled tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible way his fingers contracted, revealing that he was deeply furious, but carefully controlling his reaction to not escalate the situation. The flight attendant, quickly realizing that she had completely lost control of the situation and that continuing to press could result in serious professional consequences, muttered a vague and diplomatically neutral apology before retreating with her team. Gradually, conversations in the cabin resumed something close to their normal tone, although Emily could still feel occasional curious glances in her direction, now more interested than hostile. Mrs. Cecilia calmly passed by them on her way back to her seat and paused briefly, addressing Emily directly with a warm and genuine smile. "My dear," she said with a voice that carried decades of wisdom and compassion, "you demonstrated an admirable posture during this difficult situation. Always maintain that dignity. It's a rare and precious quality." Then she addressed Richard. "Mr. Carter, it's really a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard much about your philanthropic work and your corporate social responsibility projects." After Mrs. Cecilia moved away, Emily finally managed to completely relax in the seat for the first time since they had entered the aircraft. "Thank you," she whispered to Richard, her voice laden with a complex emotion that mixed gratitude, relief, and a growing determination. "For what, exactly?" "For not giving up on me when the situation became embarrassing. For remaining firm. For calling me daughter in front of all these people, even knowing that it could complicate things. For having chosen to defend me publicly instead of simply accepting the reallocation that certainly would have been easier." Richard smiled, and for the first time since they had entered the plane, his smile was completely natural and carefree. "Emily, you are my daughter, not by biological accident or social convenience, but by conscious choice and emotional commitment. And conscious choices and emotional commitments are always infinitely stronger and more meaningful than simple genetic coincidences." The plane finally initiated its smooth takeoff, and as Washington, D.C. transformed into a geometric mosaic of modern architecture, viewed through the small windows, Emily contemplated through the glass the impressive vastness of the country that now offered her possibilities she had never even imagined as remotely possible. She didn't yet know that this apparently routine flight would mark the beginning of transformations that would go far beyond her personal and family life. Richard, silently observing Emily's profile outlined against the soft, golden light of late afternoon, made a silent but absolutely firm decision. The gratuitous humiliation they had just faced together would not be simply forgotten or forgiven through passive conformity, not through direct confrontation, public scandal, or petty revenge, but through something much more powerful and lasting, real, systematic and transformational change. He had already begun to mentally formulate an ambitious plan that would change not only their personal lives but potentially the lives of thousands of people in a situation similar to Emily's, a program that would definitively prove that diversity is not just politically correct but economically intelligent and socially necessary. The constant and comforting sound of the airplane engines created a hypnotic soundtrack for the parallel thoughts of both father and adoptive daughter, each processing in their unique way the profound meaning of those transformational moments. Neither of them could imagine at that moment that, in less than a year, that humiliating experience on the flight would become the direct catalyst for one of the largest and most successful social transformations ever initiated by a private company in modern American history. New York was patiently awaiting them, wrapped in its characteristic urban fog and its infinite and unexplored possibilities. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from and we'll continue. Richard's apartment in Greenwich Village was a study in discreet elegance. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a panoramic view of the city that stretched as far as the eye could see, but the decoration remained far from ostentatious. Clean-lined furniture, carefully selected artworks by contemporary American artists, and a library that occupied an entire wall of the main living room. Emily remained motionless at the entrance for almost a minute, absorbing every detail. This would be her home now, after years of sleeping in shelters, care homes, and, in the most difficult periods, on the street. The idea of having a permanent space still seemed too unreal to be true. "Your room is over there," said Richard, pointing to a corridor that opened to the right. "I decorated it in the most neutral way possible so that you can personalize it as you wish. If you don't like something, we'll change it." She walked slowly toward the room, her steps muffled by the Persian rug that covered the wooden floor. The door opened to reveal a space that was larger than some entire apartments she had known. A double bed with an upholstered headboard, a desk positioned near the window, a generous closet, and, surprisingly, an empty bookshelf waiting for books. "The bookshelf was Claire's idea," explained Richard, referring to the personal assistant who had helped with the preparations. "She said every young woman should have a space to build her own library." Emily ran her fingers over the smooth wood of the bookshelf, imagining what it would be like to fill it with books chosen by herself. At St. Clair House, she had devoured any available literature, from American classics to donated technical manuals. Reading had been her way of escaping the physical limitations of her reality. "Richard," she said, still avoiding calling him Dad when they were alone, "can I ask a question?" "Always. Why me?" "I mean, you could have helped anyone. You could have simply donated money to the institution. Why did you decide to adopt me?" Richard leaned on the doorframe, carefully considering his answer. It was a question he had anticipated, but one that still challenged him every time he tried to articulate it. "Do you remember the first time we talked?" he asked. Emily nodded. "You were visiting St. Clair House with a team from your company. I was helping organize the donations. You weren't just organizing. You were teaching 2 younger girls how to separate clothes by size, explaining to them how to better care for the pieces so they would last longer. And when one of my employees commented that that systematized approach was interesting, you responded that organization was a matter of respect for the people who donated and for those who would receive." Emily vaguely remembered the conversation, but not the impact it had apparently caused. "At that moment," continued Richard, "I realized that you didn't see your situation as a burden or as injustice. You saw it as responsibility. You were transforming your experience into knowledge to help other people. That's rare at any age, but at 22, after everything you've been through," he paused, "I recognized something in you that reminded me of why I built my company. To help people? To create systems that worked better? To solve complex problems in an elegant way? You were doing that intuitively, without resources, without technical training. I imagined what you could do with the right opportunities. Emily felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. Being seen this way was comforting but also intimidating. What if I don't meet your expectations? There are no expectations to meet, Richard answered firmly. There is only a daughter I want to get to know better and support while she discovers who she wants to be. In the week that followed, Emily began to establish a routine. Richard had insisted that she didn't need to work immediately, but she had requested some type of activity to keep her occupied. They reached an agreement. She would spend the mornings exploring the city and the afternoons, helping Claire with basic administrative tasks at the Carter Intelligence Systems office. The office, located in a modern building in Midtown Manhattan, was an environment completely different from anywhere Emily had been. Open spaces with ergonomic workstations, meeting rooms with glass walls, a rest area that looked more like a sophisticated cafe. The employees were young, dressed casually but stylishly, and seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the work they were doing. Claire, a woman of about 40 with contagious energy and military organization, welcomed Emily with maternal affection. "So you're the famous Emily," she said on the first day. "Richard can't stop talking about you." "He talks about me?" "Constantly. He's planning some changes in the company that, from what I understand, were inspired by conversations with you." Emily had no idea what changes these would be. During meals at home, Richard rarely talked about work, preferring to know her impressions about the city, her plans for the future, her memories of New Orleans. They were careful conversations where both navigated the delicate territory of building a family relationship from scratch. It was during her second week at the office that Emily met Marcus Henry, the company's human resources director, a black man in his 50s, tall and imposing, with a warm smile that contrasted with his intimidating presence. He had arrived at the office earlier that morning and found Emily helping Claire review resumes for a developer position. "Do you have any experience in recruitment?" he asked, observing how she separated the documents into organized piles. "Not exactly," replied Emily, "but I'm trying to understand the criteria you use. It's interesting how sometimes the most impressive resume on paper doesn't necessarily reflect the most suitable person for the function." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "Explain that." "Well, I'm seeing candidates here who clearly invested a lot of time formatting their resumes, using sophisticated keywords, listing courses and certifications. But when Claire shows me the responses to the specific questionnaires, some demonstrate more creativity and practical thinking than others, with apparently superior credentials. And how would you differentiate creativity from technical knowledge?" Emily hesitated, realizing that she might be being tested. "I don't know if I have enough knowledge to make that distinction adequately. But I imagine that in a systems company, you need both people who know how to apply established knowledge and people who can find non-obvious solutions to new problems." Marcus exchanged a significant look with Claire. "Richard told me you have interesting insights about organization and efficiency. Would you like to participate in some team meetings? As an observer, of course. It could be educational for you and useful for us." This proposal marked the beginning of a new phase in Emily's integration into the corporate world. She began to attend meetings of different departments, always as a silent observer. But gradually she was being asked to share her impressions. Her perspective, influenced by years of need to optimize scarce resources, often revealed inefficiencies that employees, accustomed to an abundance of resources, didn't perceive. In a meeting about process optimization, she suggested that certain bureaucratic approvals could be simplified without compromising quality. In another, she observed that the internal communication system created unnecessary redundancies. They were simple comments, but they demonstrated a different way of seeing routine problems. Richard followed this evolution with growing interest, but also with a parallel project that he had mentioned only superficially to Emily. During the nights, after she retired for her studies, she had resumed preparation to take college entrance exams. He worked on complex spreadsheets, made calls to consultants specialized in corporate social responsibility, and drafted outlines of a program that didn't yet have a definitive name. The inspiration had been born from the humiliation on the airplane, but it was developing into something much more ambitious. Richard had begun to research data on young people in situations of social vulnerability in the United States. Statistics on family abandonment, limited educational opportunities, barriers to access to the formal job market. The more he investigated, the more he realized that Emily's story was representative of a much broader and systemic reality. "You've been working late lately," commented Emily one night, finding him still in the home office at 11 o'clock. "I'm developing a project," he admitted. "Something that could transform the way our company interacts with the community. Can I help?" Richard paused, looking at her with consideration. Emily was wearing simple pajamas, hair tied in a messy ponytail, but her eyes shone with the same intellectual curiosity that he had noticed on the first day. "I think you can, yes," he said finally. "But it's a big project, complex and personal. Personal how? Would you mind talking about your experience at St. Clair House? About the other young women you met there? About the difficulties they faced in getting opportunities?" Emily sat in the armchair across from his desk, unconsciously assuming the attentive posture she had developed during years of interviews with social workers and psychologists. "I can talk about that," she said. "But why?" "Because I'm thinking of creating something that goes beyond simple philanthropy. A program that offers not just financial resources, but real opportunities for professional development and social integration. And to do this the right way, I need to better understand the real challenges that people like you face." "People like me," repeated Emily, testing the words. "You mean young people who grew up in vulnerable situations?" "Young people with unexplored potential due to circumstances that were beyond their control," corrected Richard. "Young people who, with the right opportunities, could contribute significantly to society and to the economy." Emily was silent for a few moments, processing the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "How many people do you intend to impact?" "Initially, perhaps 50 young people per year, but if the model works, it could be expanded. Other companies could adopt similar programs. And you want my opinion on how to structure this?" "I want more than your opinion," said Richard, closing the laptop and dedicating all his attention to her. "I want you to be an integral part of the development of this program. I want you to help me avoid the mistakes that well-intentioned organizations frequently make when trying to help people in vulnerable situations." Emily felt a wave of emotion that surprised her. It wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. Richard wasn't just offering her a better life. He was asking her to help create similar opportunities for other people. "When do we start?" she asked. The smile that illuminated Richard's face was the answer she needed. Father and daughter spent the rest of the night talking about organizational structures, selection criteria, and the practical details of transforming an ambitious idea into concrete reality. Neither of them yet knew that this program would be just the first step in a much larger transformation that would involve not only Carter Intelligence Systems, but potentially the entire American business sector. 3 weeks after that nighttime conversation, the meeting room at Carter Intelligence Systems had transformed into an operations center for what was being internally called Project Horizons. The glass walls were covered with maps of the United States, demographic charts, process flowcharts, and dozens of colorful post-its containing ideas and observations. Emily was studying a report on successful social inclusion programs in other countries when Richard entered, accompanied by a woman she didn't know. Julia Mendez, a corporate social responsibility specialist, had been hired as an external consultant to help structure the program. "Emily, this is Julia," said Richard, making the introductions. "Julia, this is my daughter Emily, who is coordinating the field research for the project." Julia, a woman in her early 40s with a professional but accessible air, greeted Emily with genuine interest. "Richard told me you have valuable insights about the real needs of the target audience. I'm eager to hear your ideas." Emily felt that familiar mixture of pride and nervousness. In recent weeks, she had intensively dedicated herself to understanding not just her own experience, but that of other young people in similar situations. She had made contact with former colleagues from St. Clair House, talked with social workers, and even visited other shelter institutions in New York. "I've identified some interesting patterns," began Emily, pointing to a specific section of the board where she had organized her discoveries. "Most existing programs focus on basic technical training, but there's a significant gap in the development of social skills and self-confidence." "Explain further," asked Julia, pulling up a chair to sit down. "Many young people who come out of vulnerable situations know how to do specific tasks, customer service, computer operation, even some technical work, but they don't know how to behave in job interviews, how to negotiate salaries, how to navigate the informal politics of work environments. It's as if they've learned the language but not the cultural codes." Richard nodded, remembering how Emily had felt out of place on that first flight. "And how do you suggest we approach this?" "Personalized mentoring," answered Emily without hesitation. "Not just group training, but someone who can individually guide each person about the unwritten expectations of different professional environments." Julia took notes quickly. "That would require a significant investment in human resources. We would have to train mentors, establish follow-up criteria." "But it would be a real differentiator," interrupted Emily. "Most people who grew up in vulnerable situations know how to work hard. What they don't know is how to work strategically." The meeting extended for 3 hours, with the three of them constantly refining the details of the program. They decided that Project Horizons would be structured in 3 phases: rigorous selection of candidates, intensive 6-month training, combining technical and social skills, and follow-up for 2 years after professional placement. "We need to define the selection criteria," said Julia. "How will we identify young people with the appropriate profile?" Emily had thought a lot about this question. "It can't be based just on academic history," she said. "Many talented people haven't had consistent educational opportunities. I think we should focus on indicators of resilience and learning capacity." "How?" "Personal projects," answered Emily. "Things that the person did on their own initiative, even in limited conditions. It could be from organizing activities at the institution where they lived to creating small informal businesses. The important thing is to identify evidence of proactivity and organizational thinking." Richard observed his daughter with growing admiration. In a few weeks, she had developed a sophisticated understanding of the complex challenges the program would face. More importantly, her suggestions were practical and implementable. But not everyone in the company was equally enthusiastic about Project Horizons. During a board meeting the following week, some questions arose. Edward Ferguson, the financial director, was the first to express concerns. "Richard, I admire the social intention of the project, but we need to consider the impact on the company's results. The estimated investment is substantial, and the return is uncertain." "Edward has a point," agreed Patricia Suzuki, the marketing director. "I don't question the social value of the initiative, but there are more efficient ways to do philanthropy. We could simply donate the same amount to existing organizations and obtain similar tax benefits." Richard had anticipated these objections. "This is not a traditional philanthropic project," he explained. "It's an investment in talent development. If well executed, the program will generate qualified professionals that our own company can hire. But why focus specifically on young people in vulnerable situations?" asked Edward. "Why not simply expand our traditional trainee programs?" Emily, who had been invited to observe the meeting, felt an urgent need to respond but hesitated. Richard noticed her agitation and encouraged her with a discreet nod. "May I answer that question?" she asked, her voice firm despite the nervousness. Edward seemed surprised that Emily would speak, but gestured for her to continue. "Young people who grew up in vulnerable situations develop specific skills that are valuable in the corporate world," explained Emily. "They know how to solve problems with limited resources, are naturally efficient, and have an intuitive understanding of how to optimize processes. Moreover, they value opportunities in a way that people who have always had access to resources perhaps don't value." "That's a generalization," observed Patricia. "We can't assume that social origin determines professional competence." "I'm not suggesting that," responded Emily calmly. "I'm saying that experiences of scarcity can develop specific skills, just as people who grew up with an abundance of resources develop other skills." The question is diversifying the types of talent the company has access to. Marcus, who had been observing the meeting in silence, finally spoke. Emily has an important point. Our company has excellent professionals, but the majority come from similar backgrounds. This can create blind spots in our decision-making. The discussion continued for another hour, but gradually the climate changed from skepticism to calculated curiosity. Edward still had reservations about the investment, but agreed to a smaller-scale pilot program. Patricia suggested that the project be structured in a way to generate positive content for the company's corporate communications. After the meeting, Richard and Emily walked together to the parking lot. "You did very well in there," he said. "It wasn't easy to defend the project in the face of legitimate questions." "They weren't wrong," admitted Emily. "It's a risky investment, and there are no guarantees it will work." "No," agreed Richard. "But there's something you need to understand about business, Emily. The best investments always involve some level of risk. And this project, regardless of the direct financial result, is already generating value for the company." "How so?" "It's forcing us to think differently about talent, about inclusion, about social responsibility. It's creating conversations we wouldn't have otherwise. And it's positioning Carter Systems as a company that cares not just about profits, but about social impact." Emily processed this information as they entered the car. "Richard," she said after a few minutes, "can I ask a personal question?" "Always. Why is this really important to you? I mean, beyond the business justifications you presented in there. What's the personal motivation?" Richard was silent for a long moment, navigating the traffic of Midtown Manhattan while considering his answer. "When I built this company," he said finally, "I believed I was creating opportunities, that I was democratizing access to technology and making people's lives easier. And in a way, I was. But I realized over the years that I was doing this only for a very specific segment of the population. The companies that can afford your software." "Exactly. And even within those companies, for employees who already had access to quality education, contact networks, family opportunities, I was optimizing a system that already worked well for privileged people, but I wasn't creating any bridge for those who were outside that system." Emily nodded, understanding. "And knowing my story made you realize this?" "Knowing you made me realize the waste," corrected Richard. "How many Emilys are out there, with intelligence and potential but without access to the right opportunities? How many innovative solutions do we miss because we exclude people who think differently?" They parked in front of the building where they lived, but remained in the car for a few minutes, observing the movement of the street. "Emily," said Richard, "there's something I haven't told you yet." "Something about my own story." Emily turned to look at him directly, perceiving a vulnerability in his voice that she had rarely heard. "My father was a doorman," continued Richard. "My mother a cleaning lady. I managed to study engineering through scholarships and a lot of work. But when I started to have success in business, in a way, I forgot where I came from. I built a life where I rarely had contact with people who went through the difficulties my family went through. Until you met me." "Until I met you," he confirmed. "You reminded me not only of where I came from, but of why it matters. And you made me realize that I have the responsibility to use my success to create the opportunities that I wish had existed for people like my parents." Emily felt a wave of emotion that surprised her. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a deep understanding that her presence in Richard's life had catalyzed something much greater than a simple family relationship. "So Project Horizons isn't just about helping people like me," she said. "It's about honoring people like your parents. It's about creating a system where social origin doesn't determine professional destiny," responded Richard. "And you, Emily, are fundamental for this system to work, because you understand both the starting point and the arrival point." That night, Emily remained awake until late, refining the details of the program that was taking shape. But a strange sensation bothered her, the impression that there was something important about Richard's past that he still hadn't shared, something that would explain not just his motivation, but also his almost obsessive determination to make the project work. She didn't imagine that soon she would discover a connection between her own story and Richard's that would completely change her understanding of how they had met. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from and we'll continue. The first phase of recruitment for Project Horizons had been underway for 2 weeks when Emily received a call that would completely change her perspective on her own history. It was Sister Beth from St. Clair House in New Orleans, with a voice that mixed urgency and nervousness. "Emily, dear," said the nun, "I need to talk to you about something important. Something I discovered a few days ago that I think you should know." Emily was at the Carter Intelligent Systems office reviewing resumes of candidates for the program when she answered the call. Sister Beth's concerned tone immediately caught her attention. "What happened, sister?" "It's about your arrival at St. Clair House, about how you came to us. There are details that weren't shared with you at the time because we thought it would be better that way. But now, considering your new situation, I think you have the right to know." Emily felt her stomach tighten. She had arrived at St. Clair House at 17, after going through various other institutions and periods on the streets. She had always known her story had gaps, but she had stopped asking questions after years of receiving vague answers. "Sister, can you tell me now?" "Not over the phone, dear. It's better we talk in person. Could you come to New Orleans in the next few days?" Emily looked around the office, observing Richard in a meeting in the glass room next door. "Yes, I can. But can you at least give me an idea of what it's about?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Emily, you didn't arrive at St. Clair House by chance. Someone paid specifically for you to be transferred to our institution. Someone who had been following your situation since you were 15. Emily's world seemed to tilt slightly. "Who?" "That's what needs to be clarified in person. There are documents you should see." After hanging up, Emily remained motionless for several minutes, trying to process what she had just heard. Richard's meeting ended and he came out of the room, immediately noticing her disturbed expression. "Did something happen?" "I received a call from St. Clair House," she said, still trying to organize her thoughts. "It seems there are things about my history that I didn't know. Sister Beth wants me to go to New Orleans." Richard sat down beside her, his expression becoming serious. "What kind of things?" "She said someone paid for me to be transferred to St. Clair House, that my arrival there wasn't by chance." Emily looked at him directly. "Richard, would you know anything about this?" The question was asked innocently, but Emily noticed a micro-expression on Richard's face, something between surprise and recognition. He answered too quickly for someone who was genuinely perplexed. "No, of course not. When I met you, I didn't know anything about your history prior to St. Clair House." But something in the way he said it made Emily question. She had learned to read body language during years of interactions with social workers, psychologists, and other adults who frequently knew more about her life than she did herself. "Would you mind if I went to New Orleans to clarify this?" "Not at all," replied Richard. "In fact, I think it's important that you discover all the details about your past. I can send the company jet if you want." The offer was too generous for the situation. Emily thanked him but opted for a commercial flight. Something in her intuition suggested that this trip should be made independently. 2 days later, Emily was sitting in Sister Beth's austere office, watching the nun organize a folder of documents with evident nervousness. "Emily, what I'm going to tell you will change your understanding of many things," began Sister Beth. "When you arrived here, at 17, we were told you had been transferred at the request of an anonymous benefactor. This wasn't unusual. Often individuals or corporations sponsored transfers of young people to institutions with better structure. But there was something different in my case. Yes, the benefactor not only paid for the transfer, but established a fund to ensure you had access to differentiated educational resources. Your own computer, books, even some private tutoring when necessary." Emily frowned. She remembered having access to resources that other young women at St. Clair House didn't have, but she had never deeply questioned their origin. And who was this benefactor? Sister Beth hesitated before opening the folder. The payment came from a company called Carter Intelligent Systems, and the specific transfer request was signed by Richard Carter. Emily's world stopped. For a moment, she couldn't fully process what she had just heard. "Richard knew of my existence before meeting me at St. Clair House." "Apparently, yes. And there's more. Sister Beth removed a copy of a document from the folder. This is a copy of the original transfer request. See the date. Emily looked at the paper with trembling hands. The date was from 3 years ago, 2 years before the first official meeting between her and Richard. "I don't understand," she murmured. "Why would he do this? How did he know about my existence?" "That's what you need to find out, dear. But there's something else I should show you." Sister Beth removed another document. "This is a copy of your original birth certificate, which was in the archives of the first institution where you stayed." Emily took the document, observing details she had never paid attention to before. Mother's name Mary Claire Carter Smith. Father's name not declared. Carter Smith, she repeated quietly. "Emily, it's possible that you and Richard have some kinship. Carter isn't an extremely common surname, and the coincidence would be too great." Emily felt as if she were falling into an abyss. Everything she thought she knew about how her life had suddenly changed was being questioned. Richard hadn't found her by chance. He had been following her situation for years. "Sister, do you have any information about my mother? About where she is now?" "I only have old addresses, dear. But I can help you investigate if you want." Emily spent the rest of the day at St. Clair House, talking with former staff and reviewing files. Gradually, a picture began to form. Her transfer to St. Clair House had been preceded by a discreet investigation into her situation. Someone had checked her school grades, talked with social workers, even requested psychological reports. It wasn't a spontaneous gesture of charity. It was something planned and carefully executed. On the flight back to New York the following evening, Emily tried to organize her thoughts. She was confused but not necessarily angry. Richard had lied about the circumstances of how they met, but his subsequent actions had been consistently loving and respectful. The question was, why the lie? And more importantly, what was the true relationship between them? She arrived at the Greenwich Village apartment close to midnight, finding Richard still awake in the living room, reading Project Horizon's reports. He looked up when she entered, and Emily immediately saw that he perceived the change in her expression. "How was the trip?" he asked, closing the report. "Enlightening," replied Emily, sitting in the armchair across from the sofa where he was. "Richard, we need to talk." "About what?" "About how you really met me. About why you were following my situation 2 years before appearing at St. Clair House. About my mother being named Mary Claire Carter Smith." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, Emily saw something she had never seen before. Fear. Not physical fear, but emotional fear of losing something precious. "Emily," he said softly, "I should have told you before. I didn't tell you because I was afraid it would change what we built together. What exactly should you have told me?" Richard stood up and walked to the window, observing the city lights for a long moment before answering. "Mary Claire was my sister," he said finally, without turning around. "Younger sister. She was 17 when she became pregnant with you. Our parents tried to support her, but she was going through serious problems. Chemical dependency, destructive relationships. After you were born, she disappeared. Our parents died a few years later, and I spent years trying to find you both." Emily felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "You're my uncle." "I'm your uncle," confirmed Richard, finally turning to look at her. "I found you when you were 15, in a terrible situation, in an overcrowded institution in rural Louisiana. But I couldn't simply appear and claim kinship. There were complex legal issues, and you had gone through enough trauma. I decided to discreetly follow your situation, ensuring you had access to the best possible opportunities. That's why the transfer to St. Clair House. That's why the special educational resources. That's why everything," admitted Richard. "And when we finally met officially, you had become an extraordinary young woman, intelligent, resilient, kind. I fell in love with the person you had become, not just because we were family, but because you were genuinely special." Emily was silent for several minutes, processing all the revelations. Everything made sense now. The immediate sense of familiarity she had felt with Richard, the naturalness with which they had developed a paternal relationship, even certain physical similarities she had noticed but never questioned. "Why the adoption, then?" she finally asked. "Why not simply tell me the truth?" "Because I wanted our relationship to be a conscious choice for both of us, not a family obligation," explained Richard. And because I didn't want you to feel like a family charity project. I wanted you to know that I chose you because I admired who you were, not because I had a debt to the past. Emily stood up and walked to where Richard was, looking him directly in the eyes. And Project Horizons? She asked. Is it about honoring your parents, as you said, or is it about expiating guilt for not having found me sooner? Richard smiled sadly. A bit of both, he admitted. But mainly it's about ensuring that other families aren't separated by circumstances that could be different with the right opportunities. Emily nodded slowly. The anger she had expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was a profound sensation of completeness, as if a puzzle she didn't even know she was putting together had finally been completed. Uncle Richard, she said, testing the words. Emily, he responded, his voice laden with emotion. Thank you, she said simply, for protecting me when I didn't know I needed protection, for giving me a family when I didn't know I had one, and for letting me choose if I wanted to be part of it. The hug that followed was different from all they had shared before. It was no longer the careful embrace between a generous man and a grateful young woman. It was the embrace between family that had finally found each other again. But Emily knew there was still an unanswered question. Where was her mother? And why had Richard still not mentioned if he continued looking for her? 2 weeks after the revelation about their kinship, Emily and Richard had established a new family dynamic that, paradoxically, was more natural than the previous one. Without the weight of unrevealed secrets, they conversed with greater freedom about the past, about future plans and about Project Horizons, which had evolved into something much more ambitious than either of them had initially imagined. The pilot program was receiving applications from across the country. The repercussion had been surprising, not just among young people in vulnerable situations, but also among companies interested in implementing similar initiatives. Richard was considering creating a separate consultancy to help other organizations develop social inclusion programs. It was during a Tuesday morning, while Emily was reviewing the latest applications received, that Claire entered the office with a disturbed expression. Emily, there's a lady here who says she knows you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent. She said she saw a report about Project Horizons on television and recognized you. Emily frowned. Few people from her past knew how to find her, and she hadn't given interviews to the press. All communications about the project were made by Richard or the marketing team. What does she look like? Claire hesitated. Woman of about 40, thin brown hair. She seems nervous. She said her name is Mary Claire. The name hit Emily like lightning. She remained motionless for several seconds, trying to process the possibility that her mother, who had disappeared more than 20 years ago, was there, in the reception of Carter Intelligence Systems. Where is she? In the small waiting room. Emily, are you okay? You went pale. Emily stood up, her legs slightly trembling. Claire, can you call Richard? Urgent, and can you ask her to wait a few more minutes? Claire nodded and left quickly. Emily remained alone in the office, trying to control her breathing and organize her thoughts. After all these years without any news, why would her mother appear now? And how had she discovered where to find her? Richard arrived a few minutes later, already informed by Claire about the situation. His expression was a mixture of shock and concern. Are you sure you want to see her? He asked. I can talk to her first if you prefer. No, replied Emily, finding a firmness in her voice that surprised her. I need to do this, but can you stay nearby, in case I need you? Of course. They walked together to the waiting room. Emily took a deep breath before opening the door. The woman sitting with her back to the entrance turned when they heard footsteps. Emily needed a few seconds to recognize the features that she only knew through a faded photo she had kept for years. Mary Claire Carter Smith was visibly older, thinner, with premature wrinkles around her eyes, but there was something in her features that was undeniably familiar. Emily? Mary Claire's voice was hesitant, almost whispered. Mom. The word came out automatically, laden with decades of absence and questions. Mary Claire stood up slowly, as if any sudden movement could break the fragile reality of that moment. Here, you've grown so much. You're so beautiful. Why are you here? Emily's question sounded harsher than she had intended, but it was the only one she could formulate. I saw you on television, replied Mary Claire, her eyes filling with tears. "A report about a social project. You were talking about giving opportunities to young people who grew up like you did. I knew immediately it was you." Richard took a step forward, and Mary Claire noticed him for the first time. The recognition was instantaneous and painful. "Richard, she," said, her voice laden with guilt and regret. "You found her. You took care of her." "Mary Claire," responded Richard, his voice neutral but not hostile. "Where have you been all these years?" "Trying to become a person who deserved to come back to her," replied Mary Claire, looking at Emily. I was very lost when you were born, Emily. I was using drugs, getting involved with the wrong people. I knew I couldn't take care of you properly." "So you just disappeared," said Emily, the old pain finally finding voice. "I ran away," admitted Mary Claire. "Like a coward." "I ran because I was afraid of hurting you even more. But not a day passed that I didn't think of you." Emily sat in one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. "Where have you been?" "Initially in various towns in the interior. Working in temporary jobs, trying to stop using drugs. Later, I got a steady job as a cleaning assistant at a school in Brunswick, Georgia. I went back to school through adult education programs. I graduated high school at 35, and now I work as an administrative assistant at the same school. I have a small apartment, but it's mine. I haven't used drugs in 8 years, and I've been gathering courage to look for you for 5 years. Richard observed the conversation in silence, but Emily could perceive the tension in his posture. She imagined what he must be feeling. The sister who had disappeared, causing so much suffering, now reappearing when Emily had finally found stability. "Why now?" asked Emily. "Why not 5 years ago when you started gathering courage?" Mary Claire lowered her eyes. "Because I saw you on television, but always associated with Richard. I knew he had become successful, that you were in a better situation than I could have provided. I was afraid of getting in the way." "And what changed?" "The way you talked about giving second chances to people who made mistakes. About believing that people can change." Mary Claire raised her eyes to meet Emily's. "It gave me hope that maybe you could believe that I had changed." The silence that followed was dense and laden with contradictory emotions. Emily simultaneously felt anger, pain, curiosity, and a confused sensation of relief. Her mother was alive, was well, and had apparently transformed into someone responsible. "Mary Claire," said Richard finally, "can you give us a few minutes to talk?" "Of course, I can wait in reception. Or come back another day if you prefer." "Wait in reception," said Emily quickly. "Please, I just need a few minutes." After Mary Claire left, Emily and Richard were alone in the room. "How are you feeling?" asked Richard. "Confused," admitted Emily. "Part of me always wanted this moment, always wanted answers. But now that it's happening, it's being more complicated than you imagined." "Exactly. And you? How are you feeling seeing your sister after all these years?" Richard sighed deeply, relieved that she's alive and apparently well, furious about the suffering she caused, worried about you, and curiously proud of how she described herself. "If it's true she really has changed, should you have a conversation with her? Your siblings?" "Maybe," agreed Richard, "but your relationship with her is more important right now." "How do you want to proceed?" Emily reflected for a few moments. "I want to talk more with her. I want to understand what really happened, but I don't want to do it alone. Would you like me to participate in the conversation? Yes, we're family now, all 3 of us. If she really has changed, if she wants to be part of my life again, then she needs to accept that you are my father now, in all the ways that matter." Richard smiled for the first time since Mary Claire had appeared. "Emily, you have an emotional wisdom that constantly impresses me." They called Mary Claire back into the room. This time everyone sat down, creating a triangle of conversation that symbolically reflected the complex family dynamic they were trying to navigate. "Mary Claire," began Emily, "if you really want to be part of my life again, there are some things you need to understand. I'm listening. Richard isn't just my uncle who helped me. He's my father, in the most real sense of the word. He gave me stability, love, opportunities, and mainly taught me that family is about choices and commitment, not just about blood." Mary Claire nodded, tears silently running down her face. "If you want to be part of this family," continued Emily, "you can't appear and disappear again when things get difficult. You can't decide that you don't deserve to be here and run away. Family is about permanence. I understand, said Mary Claire, and I accept. Richard, I owe you an apology that I should have made decades ago. Richard observed her for a long moment before responding. Mary Claire, you owe me much more than apologies. You owe me evidence that you've really changed. That you can be trusted. That you won't hurt Emily again. How can I prove this? Through consistent actions over time, replied Emily. Through small steps, not grand gestures. Through being present when it's inconvenient, not just when it's emotionally rewarding. Mary Claire nodded vigorously. I'd like to start slowly. Maybe we could have lunch together sometimes, or I could call regularly. I don't want to disrupt your life, but I'd like to get to know the extraordinary woman you've become. Emily looked at Richard, who made an almost imperceptible gesture of encouragement. We can try, said Emily finally, but with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. And Mary Claire, yes, you can call me Emily. Mom is a title that's earned through years of care and presence. Maybe someday you'll deserve it again. But not yet. The brutal honesty of the statement made Mary Claire slightly recoil, but she nodded. I understand. And I appreciate the opportunity. They spent the following hour talking about practical details, how to maintain contact, when they would meet again, how to gradually integrate Mary Claire into the new family reality. It wasn't a magical or instantaneous reconciliation, but it was a cautious and realistic beginning. When Mary Claire finally prepared to leave, she addressed Richard one last time. Richard, thank you for having done what I couldn't do, for having been the father she deserved. Mary Claire, replied Richard, thank you for bringing Emily into the world. Regardless of what happened afterward, she is the best thing that ever happened in my life. After Mary Claire's departure, Emily and Richard remained in the room in contemplative silence. How do you feel? Asked Richard. Complete, replied Emily, surprising herself. For the first time in my life, I know where all the pieces of my story are. Some are painful, some are beautiful, but they finally form a complete picture. And about the future, do you think you can develop a relationship with her? I think I can try, said Emily, but not out of obligation or guilt, out of curiosity and perhaps eventually out of love, if she proves she deserves it. Richard hugged his daughter, no longer adoptive but of the heart, and both understood that that had been a day that changed everything and nothing at the same time. The family they had chosen remained solid. Now simply, there was space for it to grow in a careful and intentional way. Project Horizons would continue, but now with an additional dimension of meaning. It wasn't just about giving opportunities to young people in vulnerable situations. It was about proving that people can change, that families can be rebuilt, and that second chances, when deserved, can transform lives. 6 months after Mary Claire's reappearance, the headquarters of Carter Intelligent Systems had completely transformed. An entire wing of the building had been renovated to house the Horizons Development Center, and on that sunny September morning, 50 young people from across the United States were preparing for the graduation ceremony of the first class of the program that had become a landmark in the history of corporate social inclusion in the country. Emily nervously adjusted the microphone at the main table of the auditorium, observing the intense movement of the production team. At 23, she had officially become the Director of Social Inclusion of the company, a position created specifically to lead the expansion of Project Horizons. Her personal experience, combined with months of intensive work in the development and refinement of the program, had made her a nationally recognized specialist in social integration and talent development in vulnerable situations. The program had evolved far beyond initial expectations. What had begun as an initiative for 50 young people per year now included partnerships with 15 major companies, a mentoring system involving more than 200 volunteers, and a replicable model that was being studied by universities and international organizations. Emily had received invitations to speak at conferences in Buenos Aires, Mexico City, and even at Harvard University about social inclusion programs in emerging economies. Nervous? Asked Richard, approaching with a smile that mixed paternal pride and professional admiration. A little, admitted Emily, adjusting the presentation papers for the third time. It's strange to think that a year ago I was learning to navigate this corporate world, feeling completely out of place. And now I'm leading a program that can influence public inclusion policies across the country. That's exactly why you're the right person to lead this transformation, said Richard, gently touching her shoulder. You viscerally understand both the starting point and the destination. You know what it's like to be on the outside looking in, and now you know what it's like to be on the inside building bridges for others to enter. The main auditorium of the company, with a capacity for 300 people, was filling up quickly. In addition to the 50 graduates and their families, many coming from distant states specifically for this ceremony, there were representatives from dozens of companies interested in implementing similar programs. Journalists specialized in corporate social responsibility, government authorities including the Secretary of Social Development, and even ambassadors from other Latin American countries interested in the American model. The success of the program had spectacularly exceeded all initial projections. Of the 50 young people who had begun the program 6 months ago, 48 had successfully completed all stages, a retention rate of 96%, considered exceptional for social inclusion programs. Even more impressive, 46 already had confirmed job offers with average salaries 40% higher than the market average for junior professionals, 22 positions at Carter Intelligent Systems itself, and 24 at partner companies that had joined the initiative after observing the preliminary results. Emily, said Claire, approaching with contagious energy and a tablet in hand, the press team is ready. We have confirmation that ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox will broadcast excerpts of the ceremony live on the afternoon news. The BBC America also wants to do an exclusive interview after the ceremony for a special report on social innovation in Latin America. Emily nodded, although the idea of media exposure of such magnitude still made her slightly anxious. During the last few months, she had given dozens of interviews to specialized publications, participated in panels at conferences on corporate social responsibility, and even lectured at Columbia University on sustainable models of social inclusion. The transformation from a shy young woman who had grown up on the streets to a nationally recognized leader in social inclusion had happened at a surprising speed, but in an organic and sustained manner. Ready to make history? Asked Marcus, who had become co-coordinator of the program and developed a selection and follow-up methodology that was being studied by researchers from various American universities. Emily looked at the audience one last time before going on stage, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. In the third row, she located Mary Claire, who had punctually attended all public events related to the program in the last 3 months. Her mother wore a discreet but elegant dress, a gift that Emily had insisted on giving for this special occasion, and her eyes shone with barely contained tears of pride. The relationship between them was evolving slowly, but consistently. There wasn't yet the spontaneous intimacy of a traditional maternal relationship, but there was deep mutual respect, growing trust, and a genuine appreciation for the determined and resilient woman that Mary Claire had become. They had lunch together bi-weekly, talked on the phone weekly, and Mary Claire had even begun to offer valuable suggestions for the program, based on her experience working with young people in vulnerable situations at the school where she was an administrative assistant. Next to Mary Claire sat Mrs. Cecilia White, the elegant lady who had defended Emily on that memorable flight that had served as a catalyst for all this transformation. They had met again during a charity event organized by the New York business elite, and Mrs. Cecilia had become a valuable informal mentor and one of the program's greatest financial supporters. Her network of contacts in high society had been instrumental in opening doors that would otherwise remain closed. "Good afternoon, everyone," began Emily, her voice firm and clear echoing through the auditorium via the professional sound system. Exactly 1 year and 2 months ago, I was sitting in a first-class airplane seat, feeling completely out of place, questioning if I deserved to be there, and facing looks that suggested I definitely didn't belong in that space. A murmur of recognition and emotion traversed the audience. The story of the flight that had inspired Project Horizons had become emblematic in the program's promotional materials and was frequently cited in academic articles on corporate social inclusion as an example of how personal, Experiences of discrimination can be transformed into a driving force for systemic changes. Today, I observe 50 extraordinary young people who have proven unequivocally that talent, determination, and adequate opportunity can overcome any social, economic, or geographical barrier. You haven't just graduated from a technical training and personal development program. You've become living ambassadors of a new business philosophy, demonstrating that diversity isn't just politically correct, it's economically intelligent. Emily paused, observing the attentive faces of the graduates in the first row. Each represented a unique story of overcoming that she had come to know intimately during the 6 months of the program. There was Carla Santos from Miami, who had raised 2 younger siblings by herself after their parents died in a traffic accident, working as a street vendor during the day and studying at night, before joining the program where she discovered a natural talent for data analysis. John Smith, from rural Kentucky, had learned programming using public computers in libraries and internet cafes, creating a small business, maintaining websites for local merchants before applying to the program. Now he had been hired as a junior developer by one of the largest fintechs in the country, with a salary that would allow him to support not only himself, but also help his family rise above the poverty line. Rachel Oliveira, from Los Angeles, had become a community leader at 19 in a housing project in South Central, organizing women's cooperatives and adult literacy programs. Her natural capacity for leadership and organization had caught the attention of the program's recruiters, and she had been hired by an international NGO as a project coordinator, with prospects for rapid growth to management positions. Thomas Mitchell, from Seattle, had been raised by his grandparents after his parents disappeared during a flood when he was 12. He worked as an informal tour guide in the Pacific Northwest while finishing high school through a GED program. In the program, he discovered an exceptional aptitude for logistics and operations management, being hired by an e-commerce company to coordinate distribution in the Northwest region. But this ceremony isn't just about you, 50, as extraordinary as you are, continued Emily, her voice gaining strength and emotion. This ceremony is about proving to the entire United States that when we offer real and structured opportunities based on human potential and not on inherited privilege, the entire society benefits exponentially. You've brought to your respective companies unique perspectives, creative solutions born of necessity, and a work ethic forged in adversity that transformed limitations into professional superpowers. Richard, observing from the side of the stage, along with other company executives, felt a complex mixture of intense paternal pride and genuine professional admiration. Emily had developed not only sophisticated technical competencies to lead a program of such complexity, but also a rare natural ability to inspire and mobilize people around a shared vision of a more just and prosperous future. Project Horizons has proven, through concrete data and measurable results, that social inclusion isn't corporate charity or social responsibility marketing, continued Emily, gesturing to emphasize important points. It's applied business intelligence. It's recognizing that genuine diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and perspectives create stronger teams, better products, more innovative solutions, and superior financial results. The companies that quickly understood this discovered that they not only did good for society, they did exceptionally well for their own economic results. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes, including moving testimonials from various graduates who described their personal journeys of transformation, representatives of hiring companies who explained how the new employees had positively impacted their operations, and an announcement that surprised even the most optimistic present: the creation of the Horizons Institute, an independent non-profit organization that would expand the program to all regions of the country, with initial funding of $50 million from a consortium of 25 interested companies. Emily Thompson Carter will be the executive director of the Horizons Institute, announced Richard when it was his turn to speak, provoking a spontaneous standing ovation that lasted almost 3 minutes. At 23, she has categorically demonstrated that transformational leadership is not a matter of chronological age, social origin, or traditional academic credentials, but of clear vision, demonstrated competence, and unwavering commitment to results that transform lives and entire communities. After the official ceremony, during the elaborate cocktail reception that extended for 3 hours, Emily was constantly approached by business representatives, public managers, academics, and journalists interested in specific aspects of the program. The model developed by Carter Systems was being recognized nationally and internationally as a reference in sustainable corporate social inclusion. Emily, said Elena Rodriguez, Human Resources Director, for Latin America of a Spanish multinational, our company operates in 12 countries in the region and would like to hire the Horizons Institute to develop adapted versions of the program in all our operations. Would you be available for a strategic meeting next week at our regional office? Similar conversations happened throughout the afternoon. Federal government representatives expressed interest in incorporating elements of the program into public social inclusion policies. Universities wanted to develop academic research on the methodology. International organizations expressed curiosity about adaptations of the model for other developing countries. When the event finally ended, it was already past 8 in the evening, and Emily was simultaneously exhausted and euphoric. The program that had begun as an emotional response to a personal humiliation was transforming into a national movement with potential for significant international impact. How do you feel? Asked Mary Claire, approaching Emily at the end of the day, when most of the guests had already departed. Fulfilled in a way I never imagined possible, replied Emily, her voice laden with contained emotion, and simultaneously intimidated by the magnitude of the responsibility I'm assuming in leading something that can influence the lives of thousands of people. You'll do magnificently, said Mary Claire with absolute conviction. You possess something that isn't taught in any administration course or business school. The visceral and authentic understanding of what it's like to be on the other side of the table, of what it's like to be judged by appearance or origin, of what it's like to fight for opportunities that others take for granted. That understanding makes all the difference between programs that work superficially and programs that deeply transform lives. The relationship between them had evolved into something that, although it wasn't yet complete maternal intimacy, was definitely deep mutual respect and growing genuine affection. Mary Claire had proven her reliability and commitment through consistency in small daily actions, punctual weekly calls, presence at all important events, discreet but constant offers of practical help when necessary, and mainly, total absence of attempts to appropriate Emily's success or claim credit for her achievements. Mary Claire, said Emily, using her name with increasing naturalness, thank you for having been present at all the important moments. I know it can't be easy for you to observe all this and reflect on how things could have been different if we had reconnected earlier. No, agreed Mary Claire, her eyes filling with tears that she didn't try to hide. But it also made me understand that perhaps things happened exactly as they should have happened. You became who you are today, not despite the difficulties you faced, but largely because of them. Your strength, your determination, your ability to see solutions where others see only problems, all of this was forged by adversity. And now you're using that tempered strength to transform the lives of thousands of other people. Richard joined them, carrying a box with materials and mementos from the event. Ready to go home? He asked Emily, noticing the signs of fatigue on her face. More than ready, she replied. But first, I want to quickly pass by the new office of the Institute. I want to see how the structure that will be my base of operations starting next Monday turned out. The three walked together to the 10th floor, which had been completely renovated to house the Horizons Institute. The space still smelled of fresh paint and new furniture, but it already had a palpable energy of limitless possibilities and imminent transformational impact. Emily, said Richard, standing at the door of what would be her executive office, you understand that I am more proud of you than it would be possible to express in words, right? I know, she replied, smiling with a mixture of gratitude and determination. And you know that absolutely none of this would be possible without you having believed in me when I didn't even know I could believe in myself. No, corrected Richard with loving firmness. I merely offered opportunities and resources. You made all the right choices day after day to take advantage of those opportunities and transform them into real impact. The merit is entirely yours. 2 hours later, in the family apartment in Greenwich Village, Emily was relaxing on the living room sofa, reviewing the intensive agenda for the next week on her tablet, when her phone rang. It was a call from Sister Beth, from St. Clair House in New Orleans. "Emily." "Dear," said the nun, her voice laden with barely contained enthusiasm. "I just watched the complete report about today's ceremony on the evening news. What immense pride, and what extraordinary inspiration for all the girls who are here with us now. Thank you, sister. How are things at St. Clair House?" "Better than ever, actually. We received 3 calls today from companies here in New Orleans interested in implementing local versions of your program. One of them specifically wants to start by offering opportunities to the young women who are currently with us. Additionally, the state's Department of Social Development contacted us wanting to include St. Clair House as an official partner in a state social inclusion program that will be launched next year." Emily smiled, feeling a deep and emotional satisfaction, imagining other young women, some perhaps sleeping, at this exact moment in the same rooms where she had slept, having access to the transformational opportunities that had completely changed the course of her own life. "Sister, pass all the contacts to my new assistant at the Institute. We'll help structure all these programs at no cost to the organizations. It's the least I can do for the institution that welcomed me and protected me when I most needed protection and direction." After hanging up, Emily walked to the panoramic window of the living room, observing the infinite lights of New York turning on in the coming night, creating an urban mosaic of dreams, ambitions, and possibilities. A year ago, she looked at this same view as a stranger in a world she didn't understand, and that seemed to have no space for someone like her. Now she felt not only an integral part of that complex metropolis, but also as an active force of transformation that could influence the destiny of her city, her state, her country. "What are you thinking about?" asked Richard, approaching with 2 cups of chamomile tea, a nighttime ritual they had developed to relax after particularly intense days. "About how many Emilys exist spread across this country," she replied, accepting the cup and feeling the aromatic steam rise. "How many extraordinary talents being wasted daily for lack of structured opportunity? How many families that could be reunited and strengthened? If we had more systematic programs like this, operating on a national scale, and about how many you'll be able to positively impact through the Institute in the coming years. I sincerely hope it will be tens of thousands," said Emily, her voice laden with determination. "But more important than the absolute number is definitively proving that it's possible and economically viable to create a United States where social origin doesn't determine professional destiny, where zip code doesn't limit human potential." Richard observed his daughter, no longer the insecure and displaced young woman he had found at St. Clair House, but a confident, visionary, and strategic leader, and had the absolute certainty that the future of the country would be significantly better because of people like her assuming positions of leadership and influence. The following morning, Emily woke up early and found dozens of messages from graduates of the first class who had begun their new professional positions during the week. One of the ones that moved her most was from Carla, who had been hired as a junior data analyst by a rapidly expanding startup in Miami. "Emily, I started work yesterday, and on the first day already presented 3 concrete suggestions for improvements in the analysis system they use. The supervisor said he had never thought of those approaches because the entire team had been trained at similar universities and thought in a similar way. He said that the diversity of perspective I brought was already adding value from the first day. Thank you for having believed that I could be here and for having given me the tools to prove that you were right." Similar messages regularly arrived from other graduates scattered across the country. John sent photos of the apartment he had managed to rent in Louisville with his new salary, including an extra room where his younger brother could study in peace. Rachel reported that she was already coordinating an international community development project in Los Angeles. Thomas described how his expertise in Pacific Northwest logistics was helping his new company expand operations to interior cities that were previously considered inaccessible. Each message confirmed that the program wasn't just changing individual lives, but was introducing new perspectives, innovative solutions, and differentiated approaches in companies throughout the national territory, creating a multiplier effect of innovation and inclusion that expanded far beyond the direct participants. As she prepared for her first official day as executive director of the Horizons Institute, Emily reflected on the surreal journey that had taken her from that embarrassing and humiliating flight to this moment of complete professional fulfillment and crystallized life purpose. Her life had become the living and tangible proof that when we offer real, structured and sustained opportunities for determined and talented people, the results exceed any initial expectation and create waves of transformation that propagate through generations. And now, through the Horizons Institute, with substantial financial resources, specialized technical staff, and a solid network of business partnerships, she would ensure that hundreds of thousands of other people in a situation similar to hers would have access to the same possibilities of radical transformation. The United States was changing, one structured opportunity at a time,